Hey everybody, welcome to the Faith Church Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Williams. Joining me today is Jeff Clossy.
Hey Jay, good morning, man.
Good morning.
Happy VBS week.
It's VBS week. We always have to give that disclaimer.
If you hear it, if it like something in the background is more exciting than normal, that's what it is.
Yeah. We've recorded before where they're screaming in the background, and they used to do the games basically right out the window here.
Yeah, they were right next to where we record.
And so they were super loud, but now I think they're doing it in the other field. So that, who knows? It might be a pretty normal recording.
Yeah, it's been so fun though. Like yesterday, so Monday is often pretty quiet in the building. You know, it's usually kind of just Jay and us two here, right? Yeah. And it's so awesome having so much life going on in the building. Like all these kids and the volunteers and the parents, and it's just really neat.
It is fun. It's always fun watching the kids show up. I always like Tuesday morning. So this morning, the kids, it's a much faster, it's obviously a faster entry because they've already checked in, but it's also faster because you don't have all the kids who are unsure if they want to come. And so that's a big chunk of Monday morning is not just registering people, but also trying to get kids connected who are a little nervous. And by Tuesday morning, they already know, they know where they're going, they know who they're going to see, and so they just bolt in. So it's pretty funny watching that contrast of hanging on to mom, or dad's leg or grandma's leg or whatever, hanging on versus just bolting in. And so that's fun.
Yeah, it's so neat. And we each take, and people might not know this, that we each take a turn one day of the week that we get to teach the kids too, which was fun. So I went yesterday. I think you're going Thursday. And that's just such a fun thing. It's fun to teach in a totally different setting and with more props than we ever use on a Sunday. And it's really fun.
Well, I'm just glad we get rid of the pressure of like today. One of the teen volunteers asked me when I was teaching, and I said Thursday, and she said, "Oh, I'm gone on Thursday." And I was like, "Oh, that's too bad. You're going to miss your favorite VBS teacher." And she goes, "That'd be Robbie." Just like I still remember him dressing up in a scientist coat or whatever. It is true that Robbie was this was his wheelhouse, and it was pretty fantastic. And everyone paled in comparison to Robbie on VBS week. So I'm glad that now we're all normal. Now we're all like solid and the kids, whatever, but none of us are probably going to be remembered 6 years later.
I didn't have a lab coat to bring. Donna had quite a cool spacesuit on yesterday. I didn't see her today.
Donna did have, she's got safari
that's fun
gear on today. So she is working diligently to.
Oh, I see what you did there, Jay.
Yeah, you do. Yep. The diligent. So yeah, let's talk about the sermon.
Let's talk about it.
And sloth.
Let's talk about
Nobody
football
is
for a minute.
Slothful right now. Let's talk about football.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that evidently that is Marinette's big
Yeah, I was thinking, Jay, so just a reminder, Jay opened the sermon with a really cool illustration about pounding the rock. And anyone who is like, well, any Marinette high schooler for sure, or past Marinette high schooler was thinking, wow, Jay, I know you like the Broncos, but I didn't know you loved the Marinette Marine football team so much. That's like their, it's almost a mantra. They even have a big rock in their practice area that they say this all the time, and shirts that say "Pound the Rock." So it was pretty great that you did that.
I had no.
That was pretty rebellious in the middle of Peshtigo here.
I don't think Peshtigo knows that that's a thing. I got zero pushback from any Peshtigo people about what are you doing with I know it from the University of Iowa. It was also made famous by the San Antonio Spurs. There have been books written about it before. The sports teams took it from the book, which took it from the kind of the more ancient stuff. But anyway, yeah.
But I really enjoyed that part. So thank you.
Wait, what is it?
When you said that, pound the rock.
Does that bode well?
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, that was the part I enjoyed.
I wanted to make sure we got that on record.
Yeah, the first 2 minutes.
Well, because you had to say something about like a Super Bowl too. You just have to do that, and it's just fun to have a little balance.
I did. Well, because I was thinking about how. So that was part of just, and I'd be curious to know what you think about that from a sociological aspect of just how our society strives to try to make things easier, and in doing that we actually make life harder. And I don't know how we keep doing that. So on one hand, life is so much easier now, but the effect of it is not better. Like, people are not at more peace. There's not more joy. Like, the average person is not experiencing more life. They just are avoiding certain things that used to be really hard. And so I'm always, you and I are in that generation. We're the Zennials. And so we remember not having the internet at our fingertips at all times. And so we remember being in arguments, like in college in a dorm room, about some sporting event or some event or something. And there's no way for anybody to verify anything. You're just going off of your memory and trying to reconstruct the memory. And so I was thinking about that. And so it popped in my head of, like, wait, who scored the winning touchdown? I think it was Terrell Davis, but I just searched it really quick and thought that was it's always a fun thing to throw out there to Packers fans. But
it's fun. I had a friend that was from Denver that I watched that game with, which was annoying, but it was a fun time.
I watched it with a Broncos fan in the midst of a bunch of Packers fans.
That's good. That's how it should be.
It was great.
So related to what you were saying though, like, so I've been thinking about this a lot, just thinking about like in our house, we're thinking about fall plans and different things. And, like life for us, like, I don't know what you think, Jay, but I'm just thinking about life for me. Basically, I did not have a cell phone until I graduated from college. So I was like 22 or something, 23. So most of my life I didn't. So it's fun to think about leaving your dorm room and no one was going to get a hold of you, right? You were just out and about. But now, because of the way everything is, because of what we can do, maybe I'll put it that way, the expectations have changed. Mm-hmm. So I think partly, I was just listening to a lecture, the theologian Kelly Kapic, he wrote a book called You're Only Human. He was just giving a lecture about our creatureliness and our finitude. And I think that really relates to this topic, right? That the expectations that we feel now are, I think they're different than they were, because you can look up, because work can ask you to go check your email in your living room. There's a different expectation than when that wasn't possible. Most people know before I was a pastor, I was in IT, and because I didn't have a work issued laptop, I was never expected, even as an IT person, to be logged in. We didn't have smartphones yet. And I could leave work and work was done. There was no expectation that I would have any contact with anyone until the next morning. But that is not how most people's lives are now. We live with and I think this relates to the overwork you were talking about, and how overwork can actually be a mask for slothfulness and not being diligent. And I do think there's a reason that we are drawn to screens, and it's not just because they're available. It's also because of the way life is and the expectations that we live with.
Yeah, I think that there's a honeymoon period with all technology where it's a short window where life still functions the way it did before the technology, and the expectations are what they were before the technology. But now that technology actually does relieve some of the burden. And it's like this, I just would call it like the technological honeymoon period. But eventually the expectations readjust. So you give the example of, man, I remember when I first was able to check my email at home, and the very first thought was, like, check work email or whatever. My first thought was, oh, this is awesome. I don't have to run back into the office. This is so great. I could work from home. And you see this during COVID or whatever, but then that morphs into, so there's that brief honeymoon period where everyone's still expecting the same things that they expected when everybody had to go back into the office. So you got to relieve that burden of having to go back into the office to check your messages. And you also got to exceed expectations if you got back to somebody, but then that quickly morphed into the expectation that you're reachable at all times, and you're reachable at 9 p.m. or whatever. And then that becomes a new burden. and it actually just, it's a little bit like you're lifting a weight, and then all of a sudden you just supernaturally get way stronger, and that isn't heavy anymore to you, and so then they just pile on more weight. So, and in fact, I would say that the weight gets piled on at a disproportionate, because the expectations go even farther. They push beyond. And I think that's what causes it, right? So if you think of that illustration of, okay, I'm holding this weight and all of a sudden I got stronger. Let's say I got stronger to where I could handle 20 more pounds. Well, 21 pounds get added. And then another, and then, okay, then I get stronger there, and then, but still a couple more pounds extra on top of what I could handle gets added. And that's what I think we see happening is email, for example. You're just able to, and text, you're able to reach out and connect with more people. Well, in the olden days, maybe they would expect, like we could make a couple of phone calls a day or whatever, maybe visit someone. And so maybe it's like 3 connections. But now with the ability to text and email and, all these different things, it's like that went up to 30 or 100. Yep. And we don't have the band, like we're humanly not capable of handling so much, which, to kind of round that point out, it does remind me a little bit of what you see this in professional sports, especially in football, where linemen have so many health issues. Like the big guys in football, they have so many health issues later in life because we're able to keep making them stronger, faster, more artificially, even if it's not with, performance enhancing drugs. It's still with like these weight training things that you actually are putting weight and muscle on a body that it was never intended to handle. And the wear and tear of carrying 320 pounds of muscle is just too much. And so it started out as, again, that honeymoon phase of, oh, we can train and make you stronger, faster, sleeker, but then it gets overdone beyond what a human being's able to handle, and it creates a lot of stress.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, that's a really good illustration for it, because even as you're describing that, I'm thinking, the joints of their body, all the things, the way we were made wasn't made for that. So it ultimately dehumanizes you, because the reason that person it ends up in that situation is the function that they're achieving for that team. And they end up becoming the function, not the person. And it's interesting how technology can do that, like as a side effect. It can sort of undermine, like you even like thinking about texting versus phone calls. So you and I grew up when phone calls were normal, and you didn't actually do that at 11 o'clock at night because you knew that the other person on the other end ought to rest and they might be sleeping. So you said, I won't do that right now. Well, texting has no such boundary because it's asynchronous. So like, it's interesting how even as that moves forward, and maybe we can be more diligent, we can get more work done, using the work example, because the boundary that used to be built in, that like, I'm not going to call this person at 11, I'm going to wake them up and their kids and stuff. That doesn't exist with email. It doesn't exist with text, right? And those incremental steps, while they can have great benefit, also have great side effects. And I think this idea of sloth and diligence, it's why I think this topic is so important. To me, like after the sermon, I was like, man, this is almost like a whole series that we need to do at some point, because there's all kinds of expectations and changes that have happened even in the last 10 years for each one of us. I was thinking too, this is just maybe a silly example, but with social media, now that is normal, that people's lives are out there, I'm sure you've had these conversations where a person assumes that you know something about them because they posted it. Yes. And you don't. That happens to me all the time. And I'm like, I had no idea. Well, it's on Facebook. Man, I'm not on there. I'm really not. Like, I have an account, but I'm not like scrolling through. So the expectations that we've placed on each other, whether it's work or something, less important, like you didn't realize I went on this vacation to this place, I posted about it. Well, that doesn't affect my career, but it's still an interesting weight that we now bear that I'm not sure we really were made to bear. That's the issue with it. And it does affect what slothfulness looks like. It affects what diligence looks like in our lives, when the things that used to be extra credit, like a late night email on a project, become underperformance if you don't do them. or like you're trying to, I just had this conversation with someone in our church 2 weeks ago, and they were heading on vacation because we had a holiday where most of us are off, like the 4th. And I said, hey, how's it going to go? And he said, I think it should be great, but unfortunately France isn't off that day. What he meant was other people that I work closely with are not going to be off and on vacation, and they will continue to work. And so there is an expectation that I check in even when it's a national holiday. And that is just fascinating to me, that we are at that place where that is a normal thing for people. And part of what I think we need to just acknowledge is that these are not excuses, but these are factors, and why this is important to think about, especially from a creational perspective, from God's perspective. But we have made life, I think, in a lot of ways impossible. Like to have those kind of expectations is more than I think we are meant to bear, almost like a 350-pound lineman. It actually does have effect on us, even when we manage it well. And I love that you started your sermon with like the life hack kind of thing, because I think the lie is there's something deficient in all of us. There are things that are, right, that make it harder, but there is a certain point where it's not like if we could just hack it better, then it wouldn't be that way. It's not just like we just need another tip or another management, like time management system. It might be that actually the expectations that we put on other people and that we receive is just more than we can do. And so this topic to me is absolutely essential right now for us to think through clearly.
Well, it does affect, so diligence and sloth. I think one of the reasons why this affects it so heavily is it's those expectations and unrealistic expectations, and it kind of gets us out of the rhythm of just understanding what's normal. And so then we don't, it's more of survive. It's not diligence because there's no end, right? Like it's really hard to be motivated to diligently work when you know the work never ends. It's never good enough. It's never, you're basically, you're already starting behind the 8 ball and you can't catch up. And so many people who try to be diligent end up in that overwork, mentality where they only rest when they collapse under the weight of all those expectations, which then isn't actually rest. I read an article a long time ago that talked about sabbaticals for pastors and said if you wait until you need a sabbatical, it's too late. Mm-hmm. A sabbatical shouldn't be from burnout. It should actually be a part of a healthy rhythm. And the same goes for just, a day off, or when we talk about Sabbath rest. And I think Sabbath is someone was asking me, or we were talking on Sunday about Sabbath and about that kind of rhythm and how difficult that is in the culture, exactly for the reason that you mentioned about, like, France doesn't take that day off. There is no day that everybody agrees. It used to be, that was something about, 100 years ago, and not even 75, 100 years ago, a lot of towns in America were basically shut down on Sunday. And so that was an easier, it's always easier when culturally everybody agrees, hey, we're not gonna do that on Sunday. But that does not exist anymore at all. And so what ends up happening is everybody's trying to find their own little Sabbath, and that makes it inherently and exponentially more difficult and complex, because if we experience that even in the office, right? Like, so here, some people take Monday off, some people take Friday off. Well, that's done a couple of things, but one is like, it does make us be more efficient. So, if people don't understand our rhythms, we try to have rhythms that facilitate healthy rest and work. So Tuesday is like our big team day that we do all of our, basically, if you want to do team work, like if that's going to have to be done, or team activities, Tuesday's your best bet. Wednesday is a second, and then Thursday is a distant third, but then Mondays and Fridays just aren't options. And so we try, but we're in a Christian environment that understands the importance of those rhythms. If we were in a normal corporate environment, there wouldn't be that. It would be kind of the expectation of, if you got stuck on something on Monday and needed Donna's input, you'd just email her, and probably, if you were polite, probably with some kind of a, hey, I don't want to bother you on your day off, but if you could you tell me where this thing is, or whatever. It just, we're just not, it's not a communal thing, so that makes it really difficult. And then it's that 24/7 expectation. And so we just think, and I don't think I did a very good job of connecting those dots very well, but the idea of, we live in a 24/7 on-demand world, and we end up taking these little cat naps, but it's just like these little 15-minute breaks or 20-minute breaks or hour, sometimes just escaping. So escaping and rest are not the same thing. And so we just kind of hide for 15 minutes, or you hide for an hour, and just imagining, well, what would that look like if that's how you slept? Like if you just took 20-minute little naps whenever you were so exhausted you couldn't keep your eyes open anymore. And so you just shut your eyes for 20 minutes, and then you pop back awake, and you would be completely exhausted. Or the vacation thing that I talked about of
20 minutes.
Yeah, I did the math. I was just thinking,
I hated that idea so much.
Oh, could you imagine?
It just made me feel gross.
Like, hey, if you get, good news, you get 4 weeks of vacation a year. Bad news is it has to be just, you get to leave 40 minutes early every day. That's the worst, but that's what we do without. And so I was trying to get at that and saying, look, if you want to be diligent, diligence is not just working hard. And when you look at Proverbs, that was one of the big things I wanted to land. I wanted to break down the idea that diligence and work ethic were synonyms. Work ethic is included in diligence, but diligence is about consistent faithfulness. It's about wisdom. It's not about just doing more. It's also about planning. It's knowing when to stop working. It's about faithful rest. It's about being diligent in those things. So,
yeah. One of the notes I took related to that is that we can really be distracted by work. So if we want an escape, like if escape is what we feel like we need, one way of doing that, especially where we all live, we know this is to work. You can just be distracted by work, and being immersed in task like that is a form of sloth. And I thought that was a really key point that every single one of us needs to take to heart, me included. Like it is so when you have, culture is what we'd all do. And because it's culture, it just feels like common sense and automatic. That's the danger in it. Mm-hmm. The beautiful thing in it is there's really good things in that too. But when you find something like this that is cultural, we really need to slow down to try to see it with God's help, so that we can then deal with it. Because that is like, you will not ever be called lazy in our area if you are seen as someone who is constantly working, but that actually might be lazy.
Right.
That's what you're saying. And I think that is really scary to think about, that like something that we as a culture look down upon is actually combated by a thing. Like, do you see what I'm saying there? It's really sad.
Sloth is just like it's basically giving into the resistance that you feel. So for example, if you're a person who just loves being active, but that's just your default. So you work all day, and then you go home and you work at your hobbies, and you have all these different things that you're doing all the time. And if I say like, hey, you should take an hour and just sit in silence, and you can't handle it, and you say like, I could not handle that. How is that different from the person who sits on the couch who says, like, when you say, hey, you should go mow the lawn, like, oh, I can't handle it. Both people are meeting resistance to do what God has called us to do and said is important. It seems too hard. It seems too difficult. And so we quit, and we say, I'm going to do the thing that comes more easily to me. So physical exertion is not the definition of a hard thing. Doing the hard thing could be doing nothing. for some people, and that's why we have to kind of know ourselves, and that's where it hopefully protects ourselves. There are a lot of dangers in this message of enabling or making people or shaming. Like, I didn't want people to like, oh gosh, I'm not doing enough. I know people will hear what they want to hear, but I think that just being honest with yourself, of just asking the question of, okay, in those rhythms that God has given, that we are to work diligently, that we are to plan, that we are to rest, all with diligence, with faithful diligence, what sounds the hardest to you? And what comes the easiest to you? I'm guessing that most people, if they're just being honest, now again, because of cultural pressures, the person who says resting comes the easiest to me isn't going to want to admit that, because they're going to immediately be labeled as the lazy person. But you just have to reject that and say, okay, this is between you and the Lord. Jesus is not formed by American culture. So he does not see disobedience in rest any different from disobedience in work. So, so which one of those, between planning, action, and rest, what comes easy and what comes hard? My guess is that everybody has at least one of those that they say, that is so hard for me. Mm-hmm. If you just get rid of the cultural stuff, get rid of the answers you're supposed to say, just say like, that is tough. I know some people for whom it is planning, it is really tough to slow down to actually think about what are you doing? What is the best course of action here? What's the best route to that place? What is the best purchase to make? I just want it over. I just want it done. I just want to get it done. So they're resisting, like the resistance is slowing down and considering. Then there are people who make a lot of plans who have a hard time getting started, and they're like just acting on it and pulling the trigger. It's so hard for me to just pull the trigger and do it. And then there are a lot of people who say like, I can't slow down immediately. Immediately, if I sit down, my mind's racing. What we're describing is it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's either mentally. So the person who says, oh, I don't want to go mow the lawn, that sounds hard. It's not any different than the person who says, I don't want to sit down because then my mind races and it's too hard to just sit and read or just sit and in silence. Does that make sense? Like
it does. And it's really crucial, because I think part of what this issue of sloth and diligence highlights is that like action or no action isn't so much the thing. That's not the issue. It's what it's directed towards and why. And I think the best line in your entire sermon, for my heart,
was pound the rock.
Yeah, no, that was the most amusing line. This is what I didn't put quotes around it, so this might not be you exactly. So you don't have to take the consequence if it's not accurate. But I just lost where it is, Jay. Oh, here it is. No one had more important things to do than Jesus. Yet Jesus was not busy. So I had thought the thought of the busy. You and I have talked about that before, like being a busy pastor is like being an embezzling banker.
Yeah.
Like those things shouldn't go together. But the thought of Jesus, no one had more important things to do than Jesus. That thought has been just in my head since then.
Yeah.
Because I think it highlights the difference between sloth and diligence. It's the aim and the actual things. And so what we often get busy doing are not important things, actually. They feel important to us. And everything around us tells us they're important, but they aren't. They have the weight that, like, it's like something that it feels like it weighs a ton, but it's actually like a feather, like in the balance, in the scale. And I just think that is such an important idea for at least for my heart to consider, because then I have to ask the question, well, what did Jesus spend his time doing? Like, what did he think was the most important things? Because that's what he always did, which is when it's amazing when you look at him, because he did what was most important for him. And I think his life was a unique life lived once.
Right.
So I'm not saying that ours is going to be exactly like his, but if he were us today, what would those important things be? And I think that to me, for my heart, like that's what my heart needed in that message the most, for me to be able to move forward with this and to make some changes, because it just highlights it. So often the things that I'm worried about or concerned about or, wringing my hands over, he is not. That's not his main thing. And it's not to say that the things that we worry about don't matter to God. They do. He cares deeply about our hearts and who we are becoming. But often we have just replaced, like, the things that we want to be diligent about are not things that he designed us to be diligent about. That's not how we flourish. Does that make sense? That line just so struck me.
Well, I think, and I'm not sure. I'd have to go back, but I think that concept, I think I got that from John Mark Comer, maybe. I don't know that it was. I just remember thinking, like, and it's not a, certainly not an original thought. The idea that Jesus had, a really important work to do, but he's never rushed. I mean, I've always been amazed at that. I've mentioned so many times that the bleeding woman is one of my favorite. Like, that Luke chapter 8 is just one of my favorite chapters, and the idea that Jesus, when there's all these important things and things that other people are putting on him, expectations other people are putting on him, he slows down and he takes the time to connect with somebody that nobody else thinks is important or worth that time. Maybe if you got nothing else going on, it's worth it to stop and talk to her, but not when you're on your way to hopefully healing an important person's child. Like, it's always striking to me. And I think with that, when you look at, and you're right, we have to be careful that we don't try to mimic the things Jesus did. So we're not supposed to, like, oh, well, you need to go walking however many miles a day and wear these certain clothes. Mm-hmm. So that's just not the way it works. But big picture kind of motivations and how he moves through life. And I do think there's an element of ratio in this. So that's always been helpful to me. So I am a planner, and I really value rest. Like, I get analysis or paralysis by analysis. Like, that's one of my struggles. I think I've told the story before of how I needed to buy a washer and dryer, and I do not even know how many hours I spent researching to make sure I get the best deal on the best washer, because I just was like, I don't want to mess up. I don't want to make a mistake or whatever. And while I was doing that, a friend of mine in the neighborhood, this is back when we lived in Colorado, he said, he asked if I could do a favor for him and hang out at his house because they, Home Depot or whatever was coming to deliver a washer and dryer. And I was like, oh, yeah. Which one did you get? Because it was like on my mind. I was like, which one did you get? And he goes, I don't know. I just went in and pointed at one and was like, can you deliver that? And it both horrified me and was amazing to me, and like seemed so, I was like, what would that be like to just go in and say that one? And so there's this, so I have to be really mindful that I don't overthink and overplan, and realizing that rhythms of life, of those things, of plan, action, and rest, action is the biggest one. Like, just proportion in your life, most of the disciples, most of what they're doing is they're just acting. They're reacting and acting at the situation in front of them. You do have bigger picture casting, like, the Sermon on the Mount. You do have Jesus talking about the bigger plan. He talks about, obviously, his life and his death. And so that's driving. There's huge planning that has gone to this. Jesus doesn't just say, like, well, let's just go see what happens. It's not that. There's a plan, but most of their life is acting. And that doesn't mean busy. It just means doing. And then, as we see in creation, like 1/7 of the time is resting. And it's not exactly math, because obviously every evening you rest, you sleep every day, like whatever. But that is like so that for me has always been a thing of going, yeah, all of these things are important and if I trust God for these rhythms, for example, some people are shocked to hear that God might have 6 days of work for them to do. Some people are shocked because they feel like they have way too much to do in just 6 days. And other people are shocked because they're like, well, I work 4 10s and I have a 3-day week. Like, so, and I want the weekend. Good. I want the full weekend. So like, we're all wired a little differently, mm-hmm. but I think you see this a lot in retirement where people try to inverse the work rest rhythm, and it doesn't lead to good places. Like we know it even statistically or medically, that people when they retire, if they end up just basically sitting and watching TV all day, they develop mental and health and physical health issues exponentially more than people who stay active, whether it's, exercise or whatever, but also mentally active, working, mm-hmm. like investing, volunteering, serving, doing work. But our brains are so conditioned to think of work as the thing that you're paid for and rest as your escape from that thing that you're paid for, rather than both as gifts. And we're just in the rhythm that God has given us, and that everything is a gift. Like the fact that you have meaningful work to do today is a gift. And the fact that work day will come to an end and that you are given meaningful rest as a gift. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Those rhythms are so important and so valuable, and God built them in. Those are God-given rhythms. Like seasons too. And that's another, I love that idea that life has seasons to it, and even the year has seasons, obviously. But that's an important part of those rhythms for us. And when we either through technological means or just an act of our will, when we like flaunt those rhythms, like say we cheat on sleep, it doesn't go well for us, because it's not how we were designed. And, that little picture, if you can agree with me on that if you cheat on sleep, it's not going to go well for you long term. That's one example. Then zoom out farther. And there's all kinds of ways in our life that where sloth and diligence is applied, where we do that sort of cheating. And it's like cutting a corner. It's not breaking a rule. It's just we are designed in a certain way. And if we don't respect that, we will not flourish the way God intended us to. And that impacts also not just us, but people around us, right? And in our desire to then seek a screen in the way that we often do now, right? The screen is it's just a way that we can get away from it all. That some people medicate in different ways that we would all say, well, that's unhealthy. But we have ways that just kind of accepted ways of doing that. And partly it's because of how it's broken that way. And that's not an excuse, but I do think context for us as we sort through our own hearts really is important, so that we can identify, why is this a big deal right now? Because it is a really big deal for all of us. It has a lot of implications for our families and our communities and our church. It does.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about those three things in balance of planning and action and rest, and how the person who plans and rests but doesn't act never accomplishes anything. That's the parable of the talents and the one just burying it. It was so, when I think about the parable of the talents, which got brought up after the service by somebody, and it was good thoughts, but I'm thinking about that person and saying, well, that person actually planned, because when in that parable they say, well, like, why did you do this? He's like, well, I knew you were a shrewd man. Like, I knew all this stuff. It wasn't like, oh, I didn't think about it, so I just stuck it in the ground. It was, I thought about it. I planned. I tried to, but I couldn't figure out something that would be safe. Like basically I was out of fear, just buried it. So to plan without action means you accomplish nothing, but to act without plan, you might accomplish the wrong things. You might accomplish a lot, but they're not the most important things. And to do either of those things without rest means you might accomplish things, but it will be without joy. So I really think joy and peace, that is found when we work out of our rest. You and I both have had the experience, and I think other people probably have too. When you find meaning in your work, which I don't mean ultimate meaning and I don't mean identity, but when you understand that you have meaningful work and you're able to work unto the Lord, where you realize, okay, my faithfulness right now is whatever I'm doing, whether I'm operating this drill press or if I'm, doing this surgery or if I'm, writing this sermon, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to do it for the glory of God. When you're in that rhythm and you actually rest and you come out of a time of rest, like a day of Sabbath or a vacation, you're ready to go. Like you're ready to, but when you're trying to catch up, it's never enough. So like there's a huge difference between when I rest in a regular rhythm. So I rest before I'm exhausted. If I'm in those good rhythms and seasons of my life where I've been in those good rhythms, then I'm functioning out of a place of rest all the time. That was the whole Walter Brueggemann quote of a person who practices the Sabbath lives all 7 days differently. Versus when you rest out of exhaustion, it's never enough. So that is so it's a huge difference between, imagine when you go to bed on time and you're not on a screen and you actually have like a full night's rest and you wake up rested, you get up much differently than when you like stayed up too late, watching Netflix or YouTube or doing whatever, and staying up and delaying going to sleep, and then you fall asleep and then the alarm goes off and it's too soon. Like that experience is totally different. I think that's a picture of the rhythm that we're supposed to be in, that if you go to sleep tired and rest well, then you get up ready to attack the day out of your rest, as opposed to the opposite where you're just dragging all the time. And so I just think about that idea of, I don't know, more and more I'm looking at those three things and even thinking, man, we should do, that could be a whole series of how they interrelate, and then just being honest about where we struggle with that, and then trying to figure out, okay, what does it look like to be faithful then? It's, it might be really hard for you to plan. All right, well then what does it look like to be faithful in planning? What is something that you need to step back that you're saying, I just don't even want to think about it, I just want to get it done? Okay, well, maybe let's think about that a little bit more. Let's have a plan of where do you want to actually be? I mentioned that in the message of like, where do you want to be in a year? Like so many people are unhappy with their day-to-day rhythms, but they're not willing to ask the question of, well, where would I want to, like, what would I want my life to look like? And what would I have to do over the next year to make it look like that? Like what changes would you have to make? Some people, it sometimes is as simple as like, oh, well, I don't want to work as much overtime. I'm working too much overtime. Okay, well, what would have to change in the next year? Well, I need to sell some stuff. Like I need to sell a car, or I need to figure out something else, whatever the case is. Like, we'll make that plan and do it. And obviously, if it matters there, then in spiritual things, immensely more, infinitely more. Like, where would you be? I mean, we've talked about this before of like when people want to develop their prayer life, if you just prayed the Lord's Prayer every day for a year, your prayer life is going to be immeasurably greater.
It's wild how something like that, again, that's an action.
Right.
There's a plan. The plan's pretty simple.
The plan's simple.
It doesn't take time.
No, I did not need to come up with an 8-hour like strategic plan or whatever. It's a simple plan.
It is. And I think sometimes we just don't believe that something that simple could have the effects that it has. I think that's part of it. It's just hard to imagine that would have that effect in our prayer life. And that's where we need each other. I think we need God's help with that, but we need each other to say it would be worth it. It would be worth it. And, you going back to that relates to your example too, Jay, about like researching a washer and dryer. I do think that's one of those things that's changed too, that we have access to like all these other people's experience of that washer and dryer. And did it break after a year or 2 or 3 years? Is it still going? Like, it's fascinating. It's really a great thing that we have access to that, but it's also something that can be paralyzing because we want to make the best decision, right? We want to make the right decision. And it makes us uncomfortable being a creature that has limited knowledge and experience. We just can't know it all. But it feels like we kind of can if we just work harder. And I feel I relate to that, Jay, because I do the same thing in other areas,
Think about the washer dryer. Like, hold on a second, just because I want you to finish that. But I'm just what you said there just convicted me so much and made me realize how dumb I am.
I was not intending to do that.
Well, think about the 1940s. You go buy a washer and dryer. You go to the store, and you trust the salesperson and the guy that owns the store or whatever. And you don't have access to all the reviews. Well, imagine you have 10 washing machines out there. If you're the salesperson and you've sold 20 of each of those, and well, this one is the most reliable because 19 out of the 20 that I sold of that, they love it. One did break because that happens. But you get that big picture. Whereas now, what do you find? You find the one review, the one person who's broke. The 19 don't say anything about it. You find the one person that's like, this piece of junk. I had it for 2 days and it fell apart. And the salesperson's going, that is really rare, like that happened. And I just find that so fascinating that all of our research is actually all of this statistically insignificant anecdotal evidence of everything. And I mean, it reminds me of the 1-star reviews. It's a book now too, but it's a website. Haven't you ever seen this?
No.
Oh my goodness. You have to, it's 1-star reviews, and they collated all the 1-star reviews of national parks. And it is amazing. Like, people are like, this is the worst place ever. All there was rocks and dirt. And like,
the Wi-Fi wasn't working.
There's no Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead. So
that is so interesting. And not to mention, I mean, this is where we need wisdom, because we know like the insignificant, statistically bad experience of something, but also potentially the corrupt positive description.
Correct.
Paid for, or something. Is happening in our world today. Yes. And so it can be paralyzing. But like, for my heart, I know that the place I need to be with that is, I don't want to be foolish. So it's fine, do a search, but then also accept the limits that God gave us that are meant to be gifts to us of being a creature. And again, we've talked about this. It was one of your sermons recently too, that is not a sinful thing. To be a creature and to have limits is actually by design. Yes, we are sinful too, but that limit and that creatureliness was in the world and in us before we ever sinned, before anyone did. And we are just really uncomfortable with that. And it feels like it shouldn't be that way, but it is. And it goes, so one other just practical example, there are people listening who maybe have a vacation coming up yet this summer. And one thing I would encourage you with, a mentor gave me this wisdom years ago, and I have not applied it very well, but I'll give it to you. Before we go on vacation, often what we do is we work like crazy so that we can go on vacation. And we might be doing that at home. We might be doing it in our workplace. Like, maybe we double up on all the meetings and all the things we're going to get done. And so we go into vacation exhausted. It's like what you were describing earlier of waking up refreshed. And then we wonder why at the end of vacation, we are still really tired. And for me, I've done that. I had years where I did that, where I just worked super hard so that I could be away for that week, because there's an expectation that I have put on myself that I should be able to still accomplish the same amount of work even when I'm not working. But we cannot. We're limited, and that's a good thing. And I get there's all sorts of expectations coming from the outside that actually are really important, like a supervisor. Their opinion of our work matters. But sometimes we do it to ourselves. And so I would just encourage people, if you're thinking about that, if you have rest coming up, prepare yourself for the rest by not overdoing it beforehand and in a way that you wouldn't on a normal week. Do you know what I'm getting at there? It's just fascinating how we do that.
I know. Well, I was just thinking about how I do that over the years, and I think most people in ministry, in church ministry, know that feeling of, if I'm going to take a week vacation, I'm going to start Sunday right after worship, and then I'll come back Saturday night in time for worship. Now, you and I have talked about this before. There's wisdom in knowing that Sunday is a really important day, so you want to minimize how many of those you're away. But that doesn't make for a super restful week when you're just, this past time when we took a vacation, we actually left on on a Saturday. Now we got back on Saturday night, but I wasn't preaching on that Sunday, which that's a big step of like, yeah, you don't want to come back into that because that means I'm going to be doing work during the week, or I had to double up before I left. But leaving on a Saturday was really rare. It was really unusual for me. That always in the past has felt like, well, that's a waste, because I might as well go a few days earlier and get more. But there was an element of, oh, I'm not, like it was a little bit more of a restful lead up to vacation. And so by the time I left, I wasn't leaving in a frantic hurry. I was a little bit out of rest. So yeah, I don't know. But again, that goes to expectations and what people put on us, and just learning like to deal with, okay, so these expectations are unrealistic, and not being self-protective in that, but letting the Lord protect you in that, you know what I mean? Like where you say,
Yeah.
okay, am I being faithful to the Lord right now? The question isn't even what does my boss think is reasonable, but it's also not what do I think is reasonable, because then we'll go into self-protective mode or whatever. We'll just slant it in a different way than what other people are slanting it. But what does it look like to say to the Lord, hey, like, should I go and do this thing, or should I take this burden or this responsibility on, or is this a time where I'm supposed to rest?
Yeah.
You started to say something, and I
don't remember what I was saying. I agree with that, and it's a different way of living, and it just made me think when you were saying that, we struggle with our own limitations, most of us, but we really aren't okay with other people's.
Right.
That's the issue.
That's what I was thinking with what you said is, we expect certain things of ourselves, but then we put that also on other. It's like hazing.
Uh-huh.
Like when you get hazed and then you do it to somebody else, and it's like, what if we all just lowered that and tried to give each other grace? We could have a whole other podcast, man, of how do you push back against this? How do you go backwards? So maybe we need to. Maybe this might even be a class on a Wednesday night or something.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I think we all need some help in trying to figure out, what would it look like to have healthy rhythms? And then what would it look like to try to get to that? How do you just start implementing that? I mean, I remember years ago feeling convicted about Sabbath, but only feeling like it was all or nothing, and feeling like it was unfaithful to try to work into that. And I think, man, how different things would have been if I would have said, you know what, I'm going to start with 2 hours of intentional, planned, blocked off rest or whatever, and then I'm going to do 4 hours, and I'm going to do 6 hours, which again, much like we think work is only the thing that we get paid to do, we also think rest is doing nothing, and it's not always. Like, rest is rest, and work is work. It's like you know it when you see it, when you like have eyes to see it. Jesus dealt with that a lot with the Pharisees, and trying to help them understand the difference between the two. But ultimately, we want to be a diligent people who are diligent in our faithfulness, knowing then this is where I always feel like I have to make sure it's clear, is to understand, like, have a right image and view of who God is and what Jesus is like as Lord. And he says in Matthew 11, what he's like, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest for your soul. He talks about taking his yoke upon it. He is gentle and lowly in heart. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. He is not an overbearing boss. So many of us assume that his posture towards us is just wanting to get us to do all the things that we can do, serve more, do more, work harder. And that is not who he is. He wants, just think about this. For all eternity, we're going to have work and rest rhythms. That was before the fall. Work was not a punishment. Diligence is not a punishment of something you have to do to make up for the sin. It was present in the garden, which means it's going to be present in eternity. It's just going to be without all the extra baggage that we have. And then we'll actually experience all the beautiful gifts of those rhythms that we're supposed to have. And in the meantime, we can kind of help each other hopefully experience experience that here and push back against the darkness that would either idolize and worship rest and convince us that the American dream is to not have to do anything eventually. Like you work really hard so you don't have to do anything. Like that's not meaningful. But neither is overworking yourself and trying to find your identity in all the things that you accomplish. Like both of those end up empty.
Amen to that.
So, yeah, well, we should diligently desist from the work. Well, like Proverbs says,
both for those listening and for us,
for everyone. Yeah. So we can go on to the next thing we need to be diligent about. Obviously, if you have questions or anything, like let us know. You can reach out to us at connect@faithpeshtigo.com or talk to us on a Sunday. We appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we hope it was helpful for you. Until next time, grace and peace.